Hello, and welcome to Shadows and Secrets Deep Dive series. I am Kerry Savage.
And I am Samantha Skal, and together we are Shadows and Secrets, a series of retreats in an online community for mystery, thriller, and horror authors.
You can find out more on shadowsandsecrets.com.
So exciting. We are both book coaches and authors, and we love talking about story. This is our series of major spoiler alerts, deep dives into scary books we love, where we talk about the twists, the structure, masterful misdirection, villains, and anything else that strikes our fancy about mystery, thriller, and suspense, also known as MTS. But first, I'd like to introduce, that was a great transition. We are doing a great job. First, I'd like to introduce my co-founder of Shadows and Secrets, Carrie.
Thank you, Sam. Hi, everybody. I'm a writer and a book coach who loves working with writers to make their fictional ideas come to life. And I am super into immersive settings and details that really pull you into a book's world. And now tell the people a little bit more about you, Sam.
Oh, thank you so much. So I love working with thriller, mystery, and suspense and horror authors to plan and write twisty novels. And I especially love brainstorming twists and villains.
Awesome. All right, another reminder, we are giving everything away, including some key plot points and twists here. So if you haven't read today's book and you don't want to be spoiled, please hit pause, go read it, and then come back.
And seriously, we're not going to leave any secrets unturned, so consider this your final spoiler alert warning. The structure of these talks is going to be the same every time. We're going to read the book jacket copy and then what the author has done to manipulate us before we even start.
And then we're going to read the first page and talk about what the author has done to manipulate us there.
And then we are going to break down each of the major twists in terms of how the author did it, what percentage of the way through it happened, and what on-screen clues existed so that the twist worked.
We will also talk through how the author accomplished the overall misdirection and manipulation of the reader, and the way that the author used a language or setting or other elements to set the reader up for maximum fear.
Which is why we read scary stuff. We like to be scared by fiction.
Hell yeah. All right, are we ready?
We sure are. So today's book, I'm just going to pull it up here, is First Lie Wins by Ashley Elston. This is a better view of it. Ashley, thank you so much for writing such an incredible book. You really nailed it. Really loved this one. It sort of challenges our structure for what we expect in thrillers, and I thought that she really pulled it off. So fantastic job with that. Do you want me to do the book jacket copy, or do you want to do that?
Well, I have chapter one up, so why don't you do the book jacket copy and then I will jump in with chapter one.
Excellent. So I'm going to be reading this from Amazon, and I'm going to skip the parts where it's exposition on what the book is about, and we're just going to dive right in. So, Evie Porter has everything a nice Southern girl could want: a doting boyfriend, a house with a white picket fence, a tight group of friends. The only catch, Evie Porter doesn't exist. What a hook. The identity comes first. Evie Porter. Once she's given a name and location by her mysterious boss, Mr. Smith, she learns everything there is to know about the town and the people in it. Then the mark, Ryan Sumner. This last piece of puzzle is the last piece of the puzzle is the job. Evie isn't privy to Mr. Smith's real identity, but she knows this job isn't like the others. Ryan has gotten under her skin and she's starting to envision a different sort of life for herself. But Evie can't make any mistakes, especially after what happened last time. Evie Porter must stay one step ahead of her past while making sure there's still a future in front of her. The stakes couldn't be higher, but then Evie has always liked a challenge. Dot, dot, dot. It's so good. So, one thing I wanted to note about this, that just rereading it, even just now, and when I was kind of reviewing this for this talk, is we learn a lot in the book jacket copy. Like we
Mhm.
understand kind of this major plot. We don't actually get into that until like chapter three, maybe.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So Ashley, you can correct us if we don't have that exactly right, but it's a minute before we get into what's actually going on. And I thought that was such a interesting choice because we're entering the story knowing all this stuff. And if you just read it blind without the book jacket copy, it takes you a while to learn what's actually going on, even though there are some great hints.
Mhm.
Um, and I loved that. I thought it was really fun.
Yeah, whether you read the book jacket copy or not, because we've discussed before how I will sometimes go in blind.
Yes.
And I like it that way sometimes. Too, I think you do pick up hints that everything is not what it seems. There's some mysterious identity stuff going on here. So you do get that right away. It's not that they're not trying to keep that a secret from you, but it is like we are going to have to unfold all these layers, as I love to say, about who Evie is really and what she's doing here and who she's manipulating and who's manipulating her right back. So
Yeah.
um, they do a nice job of that in the book jacket copy, and I think also get into it pretty quickly. But as you said, and as we will discuss, it's not 100% traditional or like what we often expect.
Yeah,
So
yeah, but it's one of those situations where it works. And
mhm,
so, we talk a lot about having a fairly like a structure that you would follow, but you can always, once you know those kind of rules and genre expectations, you can always break them as long as it works and you understand what you're doing. And I think that this is one of those situations where, for example, and we'll save this for a few minutes from now, but like the inciting incident we were
mhm.
just talking about before we started recording, like, what is it and when does it happen? So, okay, let's do the first page and then
Okay.
let's dive in.
All right. So no prologue in this one as we had with our previous book. This is just go straight into chapter one. So it starts with the little things: an extra toothbrush in the glass holder next to the sink, a few articles of clothing in the smallest drawer, phone chargers on both sides of the bed. Then the little things turn to slightly bigger things: razors and mouthwash and birth control pills, all fighting for space in the medicine cabinet. The question changing from, "Are you coming over?" to, "What should we cook for dinner?" And as much as I've been dreading it, this next step was inevitable. It may be the first time I'm meeting the people gathered around the table, people who Ryan has known since childhood, but it hasn't escaped anyone's attention that I'm already fully embedded in his life. It's the small touches a woman brings to a man's home, like the matching throw pillows on the couch or the faint whiff of jasmine from the diffuser on the bookshelf, that every other woman notices the second she walks through the front door. A voice floats across the candlelit table, dodges the centerpiece that I was assured was delicate yet confident, and hovers in the air in front of me. Evie, that's an unusual name. I turned to Beth, debating whether to answer her question that's not really a question. It's short for Evelyn. I was named after my grandmother. The women sneak glances at one another, silently communicating across the table. Every answer I give is weighted and cataloged for a later discussion. "Oh, I love that," Allison squeals. "I was named after my grandmother, too. Where did you say you were from again?" I didn't say, and they know this. Like birds of prey, they will pick, pick, pick all night until they get the answers they want. "A small town in Alabama," I answer. Before they can ask which small town in Alabama, Ryan changes the subject. "Allison, I saw your grandmother last week at the grocery store. How's she holding up?" He's bought me a few precious moments of relief while Allison relays how her grandmother is faring following the death of her grandfather, but it won't be long before I'm the focus again. Keep going, stop there.
Give it like another paragraph.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't have to know these people to know everything about them. They're the ones who started kindergarten together, their circle remaining small until high school graduation. They fled town in groups of twos or threes to attend a handful of colleges, all within driving distance of here. They all joined sororities and fraternities with other groups of twos and threes with similar backgrounds, only to gravitate back to this small Louisiana town, the circle closing once again. Greek letters have been traded out for junior league memberships and dinner parties and golf on Saturday afternoon, as long as it doesn't interfere with SEC football. Just scanning the next paragraph real quick, but I think that's probably a fine
Yeah.
place to stop. Um,
So, I mean, the biggest thing that, since we come in knowing that she's like lying about literally everything,
mhm.
is that she's entering this really intense situation where people have known each other for decades. And that's so much harder than infiltrating a group of friends that have known each other for 2 years. Like they have a shared background, they have a shared language, they have a shared history. I mean, it's so, so difficult. And so I think my first thing is that we know that she's accomplished in this, right? This is not like small town,
You
like
don't send
small,
an amateur into this
you don't send an
situation.
amateur in. Yeah. And I think that we're already rooting for her, even though, because she's kind of the underdog in this situation, even though
Mhm.
she's clearly being hired to do something we don't really understand. But yeah, I thought
Yeah,
it
I
was,
mean the whole like you can tell too. I mean there's class markers here, there's cultural markers here that place you in a very specific time and place. And I think if you are an outsider to this, which like most of us are, you're thinking like, oh gosh, this has got to be really, really uncomfortable, even for someone who was there for far less nefarious reasons than our friend Evie here is there for. It's like, that's never easy to go into those situations and navigate that kind of thing, regardless of why you're there. So,
Totally. Yeah, and I think we feel that tension and we also, we get that she cares even though even if you came in blind to this and you didn't realize that what her background was, like you'd still be on her side because she's
yes,
the odd person out.
absolutely.
Um, and I think that's really cleverly done because we have a character from the book jacket copy that is lying for a living
Hmm.
and is clearly up to no good. And that is a difficult place to start to get the reader on board with what they're doing. And I think that Ashley Elston did this so skillfully because immediately we're like, yep, okay, got it. We're on your side. We want you to win.
Yeah, another example of this, which just popped into my mind when you were saying that, I think is another. I think it was our first or second deep dive, which was the last Mrs. Parrish.
Yeah,
Remember, it starts with Amber, and Amber, should I say spoiler alert, is not she's an anti-hero. I think we had a
100%.
nice debate about who was the protagonist and who was the villain. But even though there's a lot of things that you may or may not end up liking about Amber, you're on her side right from the beginning because she is the underdog who's come into this very tightly knit, privileged enclave of people, and she is the outsider. And it especially helps too, I think, in being in first person POV. You
Yeah.
establish that intimacy right away with I. We're immediately put, and we're seeing this whole situation unfold through her eyes. We don't even have that slight narrative distance of, you know, of close third. So,
Yeah, completely agreed. I think that the translation that she gives us about, understanding all of these relationships and understanding what she's walking into, if we had just seen a description of these women, it wouldn't have resonated as much as it does by hearing that they traded Greek letters for a junior league, like that tells you so much in so few words.
mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Inciting incident. I want to talk about this.
I know we actually started getting into a nice discussion about it. Not an argument, but like we were trying to figure it out, and it feels a little unusual in this circumstance. So this will be fun.
Yeah. So we did not agree and we haven't actually made a decision, I don't think, on what we think it is. So, Carrie, why don't you talk about what your theory is and then I'll talk about mine.
So I have two, and so I'll just do my first one because I don't want to step on you at all. But my in my notes, I had the inciting incident question mark next to the moment that Evie is introduced to a woman named Luca Marino, who at that point we don't quite know, but we find out in that scene is actually who Evie really is. She is
Yeah.
Luca Marino. So she's just been introduced to herself. And the reason that I was questioning whether that is the inciting incident is, as I like to think about it, as we're often told and as we often talk about, it's that point of no return where you cannot go back to things being the way that they were. She's forced to make a choice or a decision, and she's just, I think, in the back of her mind to this moment, I always anticipated, and I think we were led to believe that she wanted to go back to being Luca someday. Maybe she's sort of
Hmm.
siloed that identity very carefully and is holding it for that retirement moment, right? Where, okay, I'm done with all of this nonsense and I'm just going to go back to be Luca in my little house somewhere with my gardens and everything. And so when you meet yourself in a situation like this, it's okay, well, that dream is over. And now I have to decide, what is my next move here? What the heck is going on? My world has just been blown up. And I think it feels a little odd because she already is in this she's walking a tightrope already
Yeah.
because she's, has this false identity and she's in this situation under all these false pretenses. So it already feels very precarious. But I think what you and I were talking about is like, what is that moment of no turning back? Um, and this is one potential one. You can argue me into other ones for sure. So let's
Yeah,
talk
well,
about
I
yours.
think I think I kind of land on that as well. The issue is that it comes a little bit late
Yes.
for what I would traditionally say is kind of the norm for thrillers.
Hmm.
Like I mean, mysteries we always with caveats, want the inciting incident to be sometime in the first chapter. And, kind of the most classic is like somebody discovering a body or discovering
Right.
the thing at the very last line of the first chapter, right? Because then we're just like, oh, we're off to the races. We're in this story. And in thrillers, I think we don't necessarily need to have all the information, but we need to know what to be scared of by the end of the first
Mhm.
chapter. And this book doesn't do that. Um, and it's fascinating because it totally works. It's like a little bit of a slower burn at the beginning. And so that's why I think the book jacket copy is so key for the reader experience. Because if we didn't know that she was lying this whole time, the tension would not be quite as high. But the fact we're entering the story
Understood.
understanding that she's like lying about everything and she's having to maintain this fake persona and she has a mark and she has a boss and like all this stuff. The tension is really, really high with that. You brought up another one before we started chatting today that was in the past, like the flashback of when she gets caught with her credit card scanner. And that's also fascinating because technically that would be an inciting incident because that's the
Yeah.
reason that she entered this whole like lifestyle, right? And this whole job, but that was so long ago and it's not in story present. And I think up until this moment, I would have said that the inciting incident kind of needs to be in story present, but maybe not.
Well, it's interesting because she has this structure where she's moving us back and forth in time,
Yeah.
to these different identities, these different pieces, her path of criminality along the way of the story, that if you can certainly, I think, make the argument that that's the first step that set her on the path to this whole story that is unfolding before us, even though we're moving
Absolutely.
back and forth in time, because she was Luca. I mean, she actually, to be fair, she had started to wear a wig at the flower shop and sort of take on a different identity because she was committing these thefts on her own.
Right.
But at that point is when she's caught and she has to make the choice of either hopefully get my life back in some form or fashion or go to jail. And as we know, she makes the choice that get my life back as much as I can, which isn't getting her life back at all. It's just launching her on a completely different path. But
Yeah,
that is a point of no return. And I think,
absolutely.
they happened at about, I think, 15, 17%, and then, 20, 22%, which is why we both were struggling a bit because that's really late
It's
for
really late. Yeah.
traditional placement for an inciting incident, usually well before that.
Yeah, I would say incitings generally need to be before the first 10%.
Yes, agreed.
And it, again, this just works, right? Like we have enough tension going in that we're like, okay, could we have restructured this? Could we have put that flashback with the credit card scanner in chapter two? Maybe. But I
Could
don't
it
think
be a
we could have
prologue?
met. Could it be a prologue? Yeah. Like but the structure choices that she made, like it works. The story flows beautifully. And I just think this is such a good example of like when it works, right?
Right. Well, I think your point is key in that if we didn't have the inherent tension in knowing that we'd go right into the first chapter with her being in this situation under false pretenses. Then there is like, what is the narrative drive if that's not
Right.
there? And we don't get an inciting incident by the end of the chapter. You would have to structure the first chapter a little differently and probably bring forward more of that false pretenses so we understand that faster. But it works. Like you said,
It
it
works.
works.
Yeah.
So,
It's so, take that for whatever it's worth. Um,
well, to your point, I think once you know the rules, and this is one of those places where someday we'll start doing some interviews and we'll have to
yeah.
ask of just like, how did because I think I would love to know whether that structural thing came first or how she built out this story. Like,
Hmm.
when did she make that decision to say like, oh, this can be much later because I have these other pieces? Or did it come first at one point? And it was like, actually, I'm taking the wind out of the sails of the story rather than enhancing
Right.
it. And so moved it later and thought, well, you can always break the rules as long as you're serving the story. That's
Yeah.
really the key.
Yeah. It's well said. Words to live by in terms of author words to live by. Um, okay. So the next thing we usually answer is what is the story question?
Mm.
Um, and Carrie has an excellent answer for this. So I'm going to go ahead and let her just knock it out of the park.
Well, thank you. I did my homework. As I said last time, Sam always asks me, and so I should really be prepared. So I think the story question is actually, I think, two parts, or at least I had it as two parts, which is, who is Evie Porter really? Will she get the life that she wants, or will she die trying? And I
Mhm.
think the last sentence in particular of the book jacket copy really lends itself to this last
Yeah.
part of, will she get the life she wants or die trying? Uh,
Yeah. Or like, will she escape this hole that she's gotten into, right? Like this job that doesn't really have an expiration date except for dying out of it,
Right.
which, as we learn, is exactly what's going to happen.
Yep.
Um, she doesn't die in the end, just anyone who hasn't read it, but
No,
she,
but a lot of other people
a
do.
lot of other people do. Yeah. Um, okay, so this moment where she meets the character Luca Marino, which is her name, that I thought was one of like the most shocking things like in this story altogether. It was just this
Hmm.
is the moment where it's like, oh, I see, I am being put on notice.
Hmm.
I'm not even sure what the goals are. And I think that that's really interesting as a choice as well, because, again, typically I mean, there's not that there's a standard for like people running cons, but like you typically know exactly what the goals are and
Hmm.
what you're after. And with this, she doesn't know the goals. All she knows is that she's meant to like watch these people and gather information and try to like, with Ryan, does she ever really know what the,
She ferrets out relatively early, or she suspects. I don't think she ever gets confirmation, but she suspects that it's that whoever is working for Mr. Smith, it wants to take over his business because it's so lucrative. And I think that
right.
actually
And
gets
then
borne
there's,
out in the end, but it's never confirmed for her as it is in other cases where information is dripped out to her over the course of all these
right,
jobs. So it's a very
right.
neat need to know, and the person who decides when she needs to know is Mr. Smith.
Yeah. I personally would find that so frustrating
I
if I
would
was a
find it
con person.
incredibly
Yeah. Yeah,
frustrating.
yeah, super hard. But anyway, when she meets Luca Marino, she has to hold it together because
Hmm.
this is so clearly a message from her boss. And the interiority in that chapter, like I remember reading through it the first time and then rereading that chapter because it was so well done.
Yeah.
And it was such a good example of we need the interiority to translate what's going on because, of course, she can't say out loud what's actually happening. And so the dichotomy between what she says out loud and how she acts outwardly is so different from like the screaming panic that she has inside her head. And the translation of everything, like her suppositions about what's going on, speaking of like setting up twists, like she's
Mhm.
making a lot of assumptions about what Luca Marino is doing there. And then, of course, Luca Marino ends up dying. And so that seems like a message as well. And it's just, yeah, I just thought that the tension escalation through this was world class. Like we just kind of keep escalating throughout the whole thing. And even at the very end, like I didn't predict what was going to happen. It was one of those books where, I mean, I'm pretty good at predicting twists at this point, and this one I didn't see it. Um,
Yeah, no, I didn't see a lot of not I don't want to say a lot, but I didn't see a fair number of them, which I think
yeah.
was especially towards the end. This was one that was a fast read for me, and it was probably 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, nope,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna finish because I need to know what exactly how this is all unraveling.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, but yeah, that's a great point. It is a masterclass in that balance of what your character can show outwardly and how they're holding it together while there is so much churn happening under the surface.
Hmm.
Um, really a good, the iceberg where she is just cool as a cucumber and underneath it's just like everything is falling apart. And I think we learned not too um too soon before that. That's not the right way to word it. I think we had just learned, well, we learned in the book jacket copy, but I think we had just learned in the narrative itself that she had screwed up her last job
Yes.
soon,
Yeah.
like right before this happened. And then the her turns up. It's like, well, I screwed up my last job, and now here's this person who's me. Like, what the actual hell is going on?
Yeah.
It really like so the stakes we know are getting higher and higher, and then boom, this doppelganger turns up. Um, yeah, it was a this is, and also I thought, I don't know if you thought, like, this is really early to
Yeah.
be bringing in such a big twist, such a big moment, a
I
gap.
thought so too. And I mean, that alone is just another lesson about keeping tension up, like this book probably would have worked without the Luca Marino subplot, like without that threat, but it wouldn't have been as strong. It wouldn't have been as tension filled and pacey and like sticky. But the fact that that does happen early and then she dies, and then it's like, well, then we end up going all the way into the past and looking at what's actually going on. And like, there's just the flow was not as simple as a lot of thrillers tend to be nowadays. Like it was
Mm.
a lot, there was a lot going on, but at no point did I feel lost either, which is another testament to how well this story unfolded. Um,
Yeah, there
yeah.
are a lot of moving pieces and parts. As I was going back through
Yes.
it, I was like, this is one of those where I could see you and I, if she brought this to us being like, well, maybe we should simplify it a little
Totally. Yes.
bit.
Yes. And then of
And
course
and then we would have
it's
been so wrong.
so wrong. Yeah. No, but I mean, trying to explain this story, trying to explain the subplots and something to, all of the moving pieces and the different, like each flashback goes to, not each, but like many of them go to like different characters that she played and different whole storylines that she was a part of. And my inclination would have been, let's simplify that. Let's stick to just one
Mm,
narrative in the background. But of course, we kind of needed to know all of these, which is another thing that she did really well was tie them all up in the end. Like she uses the judge that they tried to frame. She uses the football coach situation to her advantage. And she's making friends along the way too, which Mr. Smith, of course, didn't, wasn't expecting. Um,
suspected, but didn't expect.
right,
And she
right.
used both of those things. She used that suspicion to drive control where she didn't have any.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it would have worked if she didn't have this con person aspect to her, because I think each of these identities, the beauty of what she did with each of them was told an essential piece of the story so succinctly. I mean, it was
Hmm.
done in a chapter or two, I think, at most. I don't
Yeah,
think any of them was more than a chapter, maybe. And I was trying to figure it was about, this isn't exact, but it was about every 10% ish. I mean, like 8 to
that sounds
10%.
right. Yeah,
Which when you think about it, like that feels right in terms of a story rhythm too. So to
hmm
be able to kind of nail it down that way, is also, I think, a great sign of craftsmanship, because it could be something that trips up your pacing. If some piece doesn't quite work and you need to have it fit in somewhere. It's not a
totally.
book killer. You do what you have to do, again, to serve the
Yeah,
story. But I really appreciated that. I was kind of keeping an eye on it and thinking, yeah, that works really, really well.
yeah. And also, the structure of having this is becoming more and more common, but like we have story present and then we dip back into the past to learn what's happening and how it's relevant.
Hmm.
But again, each of these flashbacks served a purpose. None of them were random, right?
Right.
It wasn't just we're learning them for a reason so that we understand what's happening in story present. And I think that you maybe could have told this story chronologically. It wouldn't have worked as well and it would have been probably fairly boring. But we could have started back with the credit card fraud and then moved through all of these and then gotten to Ryan and then told the story that way. And the reader would have had the same information. But
Hmm.
the fact that it was broken up into like now and before, um, again, a really good lesson and in terms of how structure can affect the pacing of the book,
Hmm.
right? Because the story present isn't actually that long. It's probably, I'm just going to throw out like maybe half the book, maybe closer to 40%. We have so many
Yeah.
flashbacks and so we need to know all this stuff so we understand the tension that she's feeling
Mhm.
and how she's actually going to get out of this. But yeah, it just,
And
well
there's
done.
no wasted business either, which I think, speaking as a writer, I know I have done this myself, and I've seen
Same.
lots of other people do it. Of She's very like, this happened 2 years ago, and it drops you right into her story, her that story past moment. There's
Hmm.
no, well, then, when we go from like 4 years ago or 6 years ago to 4 years ago, we don't care what she did in those 2 years in between.
No,
Maybe
we
there's
don't
a
need to know.
sentence that said, like, oh, I moved to Tampa right after the last job or something, and
Right.
that covers it. Whereas I think a more novice storyteller like myself, that your first instinct can be, when you're just starting out, to say, like, oh, I need to explain everything to the reader. And you do know that's when you go back and you revise and you edit all of that stuff down to a single sentence, because you don't need to know.
Right.
That stuff doesn't move the story forward. What's moving the story forward is that action
Hmm.
that propels things. That these are the exact things that you need to know to make sense of the story that I'm going to unfold for you over the course of
Right.
these pages.
Right. Yeah. It's just, it was really well done.
Yep.
Um, okay. Midpoint.
Mm,
So my Kindle, we talked about this as well. Our both of our Kindles showed up at 95% as the book being done because I think there might have been a teaser for something else at the end.
probably, yeah.
Or something, I can't remember. But so these percentages might not be like exact, but around 48% on my Kindle, the way that it was tracking, she reveals to Rachel, Ryan's friend, the lawyer, about not being Evie Porter.
Mm,
And that felt like that's a huge moment. It's also agency filled, which is something I'd love to talk about with this character because at no point, even though she's kind of being buffeted around and being manipulated, she doesn't really let herself fall into that trap of being like, woe is me, what am I going to do about it? She gets angry
yes.
and she tries to figure out how am I going to get out of this and what am I going to do? And that is so much more pleasurable to be around than somebody being like, oh, well, I guess I'm going to go over here now.
Go
It
there and be
just,
sad. Oh no.
yeah, she's got a lot of moxie and she's really, she's a strong character and as such, she's really fun to be, even if we don't agree with her decisions.
Mm,
We're like, yeah, go get it, get
yeah.
after it. Um, and then at 50% exactly, it's the reveal that Judge McIntyre, the one who ultimately helps her escape the charges that Mr. Smith has set her up for, was
Mhm.
at the setup party, like the party where they were trying to
Mm,
screw him over.
mhm.
Um, and it's the moment where she's in the system now as Evie Porter for the first time, which means she
Right.
can't go back to Luca Marino. And I think that that might actually be the midpoint moment that I vote for. I don't know the exact percentages are probably it's like 48 or 51 or something, but that's it. She can't go back. And
Right.
that's
Right. I mean, there are a few like another. There's a few of those points, which again, that is really excellently done. The more of those points where
yeah.
your character is forced to make these rock and a hard place
Yeah,
decisions.
like
Yeah, exactly. I had one more that I will suggest, which is I
hmm
think a little bit later. I had it once I adjusted my percentages, my notes say 55%, so that's a little bit later, but it's right in that 50. So she's had the party, they've had the party, something has gone down with this
hmm
potential governor, candidate for governor that she's supposed to be blackmailing. She has taken the situation into her own hands because she thinks whoever's plan it was, I forget his name, Matt's plan, the guy at the bail bonds place who's kind of a
Yeah.
jackass. She's like, oh, his plan was weak and stupid, and I'm not going to do that. So like my point there was like that's when she's really taking the power. She shows up at the bail bonds place and is like, your plan was crap, my plan was better, we did it, and here are the results. So it's kind of pushing him out of the way and telling him and Mr. Smith, like, like I'm your star player now. You're gonna
Yeah.
like we're gonna work together in a new and different way. So again, that's another sort of pivot point where she's not gonna take any shit anymore. Well, within reason. I mean,
Within reason.
she still has this mysterious entity, but she's like, I'm not going to deal with this idiot who, his
Right.
whole plan to corrupt the incorruptible, incorruptible guy. Oh, that was really hard for me to say. Is to like put him in a room and get him drunk with some girls.
Right.
And he's not going to go for that. I know he's not going to go for that. So I'm changing the plan to something that will work. And
Yeah.
guess what? It did work. And it also really ratcheted up. That was at the first point, I think maybe it was where Mr. Smith sort of starts to recognize or has to start to recognize that she is someone to be reckoned with. She's not just going to always play by his rules because that's when he starts to suspect, does she have dirt on all these people and she hasn't told me everything?
Right. Right.
That was the first time, I think.
I think so too.
Before
Yeah.
then, she'd always played by the rules.
Again, a complicated story. There was a lot to keep track of.
Yeah.
Um, the the painting heist and the Tate
Mm,
job and like having all these people that work for him go after the same thing to see who wins. And also Devin as her helper, like he's
love
just
Devin.
an aside, like just a great character and we love that she has somebody she can trust implicitly who knows everything about what's going on, but who also is kind of mercenary, right? Like he's happy to do whatever it takes as long as he gets paid and she keeps his identity a secret.
I mean, not to jump ahead, but at the end, when she's like, I'm done doing this, and he's like, are you really? Okay, talk to you in a month. And
Right.
you're
And then of
out.
course, yeah. The painting heist was the only moment in this book where I was like, what's happening a little bit, because
Oh,
I felt
okay.
like we jumped, and then it kind of she explains it and we get through it. But that was
Mhm.
the only moment where it didn't seem like a normal con. It was, she knew what the goal was and she knew what the target was in a new way. And then, of course, it turns out it's a test and all of these things. But I thought that was an interesting choice as well.
It's funny, we had a little mini caper in there, a
Like a little
little,
mini caper. It was
yep.
fun.
It's like a little Ocean's 11 in the middle of the
Yeah,
book. Until you find out, and it was a great way, I thought, to introduce the concept of, oh, this is how I'm going to find out who else is working for him.
yes.
And they're
Yeah,
able to do it. And that feeds into a later twist when you're led to believe that Devin, as good as he is, just kind of couldn't find everybody. He found one person. And
totally.
then you find out much later when she actually meets Amy that the reason that he couldn't find them, he found them, but they were all dead.
Right.
Except for Amy, which is another one of those oh shit moments when you realize like this is they're not messing around. He's not
No.
messing around. You already knew because Luca and James had been set up to die, but
Hmm.
that was really the ruthlessness has been ratcheted up to a new level in that
A
moment.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Um, I'm just looking at my notes. So
Yeah.
at 71%, she decides she wants to run,
Hmm.
but she can't without looking over her shoulder. So she decides to stay in the game. And so not quite like a dark night. Does she really have a dark night of the soul?
Not really. I think probably the closest thing would be that first meeting with Amy where she's not sure if she's going to
Yeah,
get the co-op because she's kind of like, I can't get out and I can't put this plan in motion that I have to get me out without help, without more help than just Devin. I need more than just Devin and it's going to take
hmm.
more. And there is a moment where she's really not sure that Amy is going to join her. Amy seems like she's going to walk away. That
Right.
might be the closest thing that she comes to. And it lasts for
Yeah.
just a second. It's not.
Yeah. But again, not traditional,
Right.
right? Like normally, just for new people listening and for anyone who's not familiar with this, like normally we have a dark night of the soul, and then we have at some point later the emotional aha moment where the misbelief is proven incorrect. And Dark Night of the Soul is a classic in literature for a reason, right? It's the moment right before the climax, typically, where the protagonist is like, "Oh shit, like I'm not going to get out of this, or I'm not going to be able to do this," and then there's some kind of realization, and then they go off and they conquer the world and whatever. But with this, I mean, I from the reader perspective, which I thought was interesting, it's when Luca Marino when she's presented with the video of her going in to murder Amy Holder.
Oh,
That was a moment where I, as the reader,
yeah.
was like, oh shit, like she's completely screwed. There's no way out of this. And then of course she turns it and is like, that's Luca Marino. And it's like, yes, it is, but also that person's dead and she gets away with it. And that was very, very clever.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I would
That's
love
why
to
she
hear,
did. She did need a Luca, actually. She did
she
need that.
did.
She did need that character, and I loved that she could, that she figured oh my God, why am I just
Evie figures out
Evie figures out like I figured out how to use this against. I love
Mr.
when there's that
Smith.
kind of
Yeah.
twist too, of just like, well, you put this in play to screw me, but I figured out a way to use it against
Oh,
you
it's
and
so
actually get
delicious.
myself out of it. It just feels really good as the reader, if you're rooting for the protagonist, which we are in
Yeah.
this case. So at least I was.
Yeah, 100%. And I would love to at some point find out from Ashley Elston, like what did she think of first,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when did that moment of realization that she could turn this, like from an author perspective, like it's just so good.
Yeah. I would love
What
to
a moment.
talk to her about the structure of
I
the book.
know. It would be so
So
fun.
it's
This
like
book is
the
so
literal
fascinating.
crafting of this book, would be
Yes.
fascinating.
Yeah. Climactic scene kind of around that same time. It's when, where we were presented with the video and we have this moment where it coincides, I think, with the emotional aha moment of
Mm.
at 84%, if I'm losing Luca Marino forever, it's going to be worth it.
Hmm.
And that's kind of that decision to like start putting everything in motion and going after Mr. Smith. And then we find out Mr. Smith is George and like all this stuff. So the climactic scene is, lasts for quite a while,
Hmm.
but very sticky. I mean, there was no way I was putting the book down during that time.
Right? Yeah. I think that was a moment that stayed with me when she is they're at the motel. I forget exactly where they are. They're not in Atlanta yet, but she
Hmm.
figures out that Ryan
Oh God, that was so intense
Ryan
too.
is talking to
Yeah.
George, and I think that's when it starts. I don't know if it's 100% confirmed that George is Mr. Smith, but we sort of have a sense that maybe that's what's going on. And then you wonder, like, so who really, like, is Ryan the mastermind at this point?
Right.
Like, what? Who? Heh.
Yeah.
So then
No.
you're not stopping until you figure it all out.
And in the, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I I don't want to go back and like look right now because it'll take too much time. But in that moment when she overhears them talking, that's another dark night, right? Because
Yes.
she is convinced that Ryan has been lying to her this whole time, and the stakes have just changed again, right? She's going to lose everything. That might actually be the proper dark night.
That actually, yeah,
Um,
you're right. Because she's always known that she's been a little bit of a mark, if that makes sense, in terms of
yeah,
her relationship to Mr. Smith. But she always thought that Ryan was the mark in terms of that relationship.
right.
And she knows that like there's some affinity there beyond like the emotional feelings that she's having for him. There's some affinity there in that they're both a little shady, and I think they've both recognized that at this point. But
Yeah.
to have him go from like, oh, a little shady, maybe we're both comfortable in the gray areas, to, oh no, maybe he's the person who's pulling all the
Oh God, it's
strings,
so good.
is a really interesting moment.
Yeah, agreed.
And because of her emotional attachment to him, that really, I think you're onto it. I think that might be our dark night moment of like, I knew I couldn't trust anything, but now I really can't trust anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the Dark Knight.
Mm.
And then, the emotional aha, she again, she's gonna lose, she's gonna make it worth it to lose Luca Marino, but then also she decides that walking away was never an option when she confronts George. And that's when we have the swan in the safe deposit box, and we learn that George is actually Mr. Smith. And then, of course, the power shifts, which in every great thriller it does between the protagonist and your supervillain. Um, and then that whole unfolding of, Amy Holder is actually alive and Devin is there, and all of that was just very delicious.
Hmm.
And that flashback of what actually happened was so well timed. And it didn't feel like we were being lied to because it all happened like when you look at the timing of story present, when she changes
Hmm.
the power dynamic, I mean, it all happened in the past. So like it is a choice to reveal it when we did, but I thought it worked really well. I didn't feel like information was being withheld in a sneaky way.
No, because I think if you look at literally the timing of when things are revealed in past and present storylines, she takes us right up to a certain moment and then cuts it off rather than show us something, but we haven't been told the whole thing, if that makes sense.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
see everything as it's unfolding. And like that moment with when we first, I think it's the still photo of Luca, and she's like, you see me like lighting the match and dropping it on the bed sheet
But
or
we don't
something.
see like Amy burning. We just
Right.
see,
It's
yeah.
up to that when she like lights the match and drops it, end scene. And then when later on when you find out how the whole thing unfolded and Amy like ended up in the cart, it's like, oh well, we saw her like bring the cart into the room. We saw her at that moment or before like tuck the bag in. So it was all there. All the pieces were there. She just didn't show us at that time. So it
I
was a
mean,
timing see which is really hard to do.
it's really hard to do. Like you have to understand so much as the author about what you're revealing when and why.
Mhm.
Um, And in terms of setting up the twist, so like, the climactic twists are that George is Mr. Smith, that Amy Holder's not dead, that she's been planning this, like Evie's been planning this for quite some time, but wasn't sure whether or not she was going to pull it off, right?
Mhm.
And so all these little setups that she's made, like the swan being in the safe deposit box, that's been there for a couple years,
Yeah.
and she just needed the right moment to be able to pull it off. But all of the like Evie Porter as our protagonist is not making she's making some assumptions about Ryan because she doesn't know what's going on with Ryan. And she has her assumptions about Mr. Smith, and not that he's George, but that he's this, she's going to take him down at some point.
Mhm.
But the reader assumptions are so skillfully done because we are looking at the logic that's being presented to us and being like, oh, Amy Holder is dead. She's
Mhm.
being arrested for Amy Holder's murder. Got it. Okay. And then, of course, it's a twist because we're wrong and Amy Holder
Mhm.
is alive. But just, Chef's kiss. It was just
It is a big ask to, that takes your friendship or whatever it is to a whole new level to ask someone to source a dead body for you, I will say. I think she even kind of said that or alluded to it anyway of, it's one thing to ask him to like get you some tech or plant some cameras, but then it's like, can you get me a dead white woman that we can
totally.
we can
Yeah.
swap in here?
Yeah, completely.
Oh,
Um, and then of course she ends up being Miss Smith at the end and takes over
yes.
because this is a lucrative business and she's going to do it right. Um, did you have any other notes? I mean, I feel like anything else you want to talk through?
I think we've pretty much covered everything. It was, it does what I think a lot of the books that we have chosen, and this is the reason we choose them because they do these things so well. This felt like less of a slow burn up front than the last one we did to me, but there was, there's a steady stream of misdirection, twists, reveals. It's not just at these major beats. I mean, those are all there too.
Hmm.
But it's got a lot of additional places, and I think part of that, as we've talked about, is how she plays with structure. She takes
Yeah.
full advantage of that in a really, really smart ways. Um, and there's just clearly a lot of thought had gone into this about where you concede things in order to give us sort of gaspy moments for the last 20-25% of the book, just
Yeah.
one
I mean,
after
it was
another.
just one after another. It was so well done. And I will say that, like, I don't imagine that Ashley Elston came out of the gate with this being structured this way. Like, I would love to hear what the kernel of the idea was and like where we started. But I imagine this went through so many versions to get it to where it is. Because when you look at something like this, it's so complex and like everything serves the end, and there's no kind of pointless information that we're being given. It just feels impossible, when you're like in the revision phase, you're like, how am I ever going to do this? But I think that, we can get there. And this is a complicated book, but the main storyline is actually pretty simple. It's your story question, Like, who is Luca Marie or who is Evie Porter really? And is she going to be able to get out alive? And the answer to that is she's now Evie Porter.
Evie Porter Smith.
Yeah. And she is going to get out alive because she's a smart cookie.
Yep.
And yeah.
And she gets the life that she wants in a way. I mean, she's in, she's living with Ryan and they've got the big garden in the backyard.
Hmm.
When she showed up to see him, she couldn't sit in the chair to face the garden because it was gonna, stab her in the heart that he
Right.
had gone ahead and planted the garden that they had talked about having and so on and so forth. So yeah, she got
Yeah.
what she wanted.
Well, and their dark love
To a certain
story is
extent.
quite nice too.
Yeah.
So it's like
It's
they're
true.
both con artists and, doing kind of nefarious things, and they
Yep.
found each other and they're just being truthful in their own way. So
Yep. It works
yeah,
for them.
it worked really well. So well done. First Lie wins. Great
Yes.
book. Reese's book club pick, and I'm not surprised.
No, I think within the first couple pages, I was like, yeah, I
Yeah,
can see this. I
yeah,
can see why.
yeah. That's
So
really
it'll be
good.
interesting to see if we get some kind of show or movie or whatever,
Would not be shocking.
No,
Yeah,
not at
would
all.
not.
But as
Well,
Sam was saying too, just our last little wrap up, which I'm not sure we did last time, but like as we were just talking about how carefully crafted this was and how much it must have evolved, do not compare your work in
no.
progress to this finished product or any finished product. Like you can get here, you absolutely can get here, but it is not a one and done kind of thing or two or even
No.
three. It's a lot of work goes into this, and a lot of really skilled eyes and thoughts and brains and all that stuff. So
Yeah,
just want to reiterate that.
100%. Yeah. Well, thank you for listening, everyone. We really
Oh,
appreciate it. We hope you
thanks,
enjoyed that.
everybody.
And if you're curious about us, we are shadowsandsecrets.com, and we hope to see you next time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye.